We have Ron Abramovich from the Water Snow Survey in Boise. He's going to be telling us the story about the water year from the snow and flow perspective.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the committee, too, for the invite up here as well. And it was an interesting year last year, so I just wanted to kind of summarize it a little bit like these gentlemen and the panel's been talking about as well, too. So let's jump into it. Page down. So John had me write an abstract, and I'm not sure why, but here it is. You don't have to read it, so I abbreviated it for you because I find myself repeating it a lot in the wintertime. So these are the key words that stood out this winter. Unique. We mentioned that quite a bit. November Arctic cold spell. Snow drought was a key word we used. 2 atmospheric river events we had up here, actually. Dry, warm March and April. Record high early irrigation. We're going to talk about May rains, how that saved a number of the irrigators in southern Idaho this year. Then just a little cap of the past couple years as well, too, and unique variability. So actually I put my summary slide also, too, because sometimes I get on tangents, and I don't know how else to say this, but rain is good, but snow's better. And so it allows you to make your decisions earlier and plan wisely, but this year a lot of farmers had adjusted because of those May rains. With the increase in climate variability, the key is understanding the storm tracks that bring moisture into your basin and what makes it flow. Are you still going to get one more peak from the snowpack when half the pack is melted? Or in Oregon and Washington, you didn't have much snow to begin with either. So what are the precipitation intensities that you need in the springtime? So just to recap, going back to October, you saw the moisture coming in. These are Oregon State prism maps. So yellows and oranges are below average, white is near average basically, and the greens are above normal precip. The lack of precip is the red in California basically for the month of October. So we got a little bit coming in. We didn't think it was too bad, and then November brought a little bit more as well too, coming down from Idaho or from Montana into Idaho here. So, but what happened in November was that Arctic cold spell, and just learned more about this 2 weeks ago and how it happened. So you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm really a hydrologist and just an armchair meteorologist. And so what the one chief meteorologist in Portland or in Boise said was there's an atmospheric dam that created, and that all that cold air came over the Montana border, like Lookout Pass, Lolo Pass, and down the Salmon River into Boise. So we went from 50 degrees down to 7, basically, single digits in a few days. What happened was there's still a lot of sap in the trees, and it froze it, so it killed a lot of red trees, plum trees and cherry trees, impacted some of the orchards, and we didn't find this out till later in the springtime, how strong the influence of this cold spell was. These guys talked to some of the sharpest meteorologists from Idaho Power, and they said, no, we don't see anything on the horizon. So they went boating and hunting, and the river literally froze overnight. So they ended up leaving the boats there and got flown out and went back this spring and got their boats back. So it was quite the spell, but cold is good. So here's October through December precipitation. For the Pacific Northwest, it's still looking at near average, basically, whites and shades of green in there. So we didn't think it was too bad. Looking at Snowtell Mountain precipitation, water year to date, January 15th, normal or better across the Pacific Northwest, not a precipitation drought. And so, but you can't leave out the temperatures, and that's what we're talking about. So October, December precipits or temperatures were 1 to 5 degrees above normal, basically. And it was just the influence of the temperatures on our building our mountain snowpack. So in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, we were still pretty lucky to have some of the colder temps and the snow falling, the precip falling the snow in the high country, but that was quite the difference in the Oregon Cascades and Washington as well too. The cold Christmas temperatures brought some of the best powder days around last year. It was amazing. You had little storms and great powder for a few weeks in there. It was just, wow, this is going to be great if it continues, but we got to mid-January and it didn't. Now we jump to March, and I don't know how many of you have been to our snowtell sites, but we tend to hide them on north-facing slopes where the snow tends to accumulate. Because once they go to zero, we can't correlate it to the stream flow as well. And this is a picture looking down the ski run at Sun Valley, and you see the ribbon of snow coming down there basically on the ridge. The other impacts John mentioned as well too was the skiers. And I used to be on a ski board for the Bozeman Basin Ski Club with my daughter actually who happened to be here, Abby. So she's attending here, and that's her picture when she used to race. But the snow drought was the first signs of the drought. It's when the ski races had to be moved because you don't have enough snow to host a ski race. And that's when they start juggling around. Nobody wants to move a ski race because it brings money into your local economy. And so you want to have it, but if you don't have the snow, you got to move it. So last year, Jackson, good or bad, they lucked out. Most of the races got moved to Jackson. The bad part is they ran out of volunteers, so they had to pay people to put on these races so they could still race them. So it was an interesting year. So let's move on to March and April. So 2 slides here. Like you mentioned, 1977 as well too. When I know or remember about that, it was cold, but it was dry. And it was the opposite of this one. Here we're wet and warm. And so our amount of snowpack actually peaked around the first week of March rather than the first week of April like it normally does. So I think we're going to be talking about this year for quite a bit because it peaked so early. And it's just a very unusual year in terms of that. So what we felt, what hurt us the most was that the March temperatures being above normal, 7 to 10 degrees above normal here in the prism maps. And a precip in central Idaho was down to 16% there. And it was a combination of those two, the warmth and the dryness as well too, that really deteriorated the snowpack. So here's a water year-to-date precipitation in early April. You can see it's all coming down back to near average basically. Yellows below normal and greens are still pushing near normal for the SNOTEL precip. But on the right side is a record low snowpack for many sites, not just in the Pacific Northwest, but across the West as well too. Here's a few slides from Abby Lutz in Boise. She's with the Rocky Mountain Research Station, and it's a good way to illustrate what actually happened. Here's 2 sites in Montana, and elevations 5,600, a lower site, but normally they get 70% of the precip falls as snow. This year it was 60. A higher site, normally they get 97% of the precip falling as snow, and this year was 92% in Montana. Move down to central Idaho around Stanley, Graham Guard Station, 75% normally falls as snow, and this year is about 60. And a little higher site, Jackson Peaks, is 92%, is about 84%. We've got 2 more in here too for Washington. Stampede Pass, normally 80%, and this year is 34% that fell as snow between the November 1 and March 31 period. And then Paradise as well too, a little higher up. Normally 92, and they got half of it, about 46% falling as snow during the winter time. So here's one of those wild cards I was talking about. And so you really have to monitor your sites to see where that snowpack is. This is in eastern or southwest Wyoming, Spring Creek Divide. And some of our high sites still had a normal snowpack. And so we floated the Green River this summer, and those guys, even on the green, said this was the most unique and unusual year they ever saw because they thought the flows were going to be low, but it's this high snow that kept the streams higher than normal late in the year. Actually helped to fill some of the reservoirs in the Upper Snake and in Idaho as well too. So you really have to look at your sites closely what was happening. So I went back and looked, how common is this? We had Paris Edwards in the back. She was an intern from the University of Idaho this summer. She helped update these graphs. So this graph just shows the water content for March 1st for these 13 SNOTEL sites, it looks like, for the Clearwater Basin, going back to 1961. And they're just sorted from low to high with the maroon, the red in the background, and then the April 1 water content on first. And see, and for the period of record, only 1 year, 1992, we actually lost water between March 1 and April 1. So this might be a good basin that we have well monitored, a lot of high elevation sites. So it's also, you can use it for that in a way. 2015, we just dipped a little bit lower on April 1st than March 1st. So, but then when you move south into the Wahi Basin, it's a lot different down there. And so half the time, the April 1 water content is less than the March 1. But that goes down with the average as well too. The March 1 average is 9.2 compared to 8.2. So this is more common and basically a function of the elevation in your watershed. The taller mountains, the better off you are. So here's a few more from the Wahi Basin. I found out that the Wahi Basin is larger if we were combining the Weiser, Payette, and Boise together. So it's a fairly big watershed down there. And And you hear a lot of comparisons about the California drought. And actually, the Wahi drought's not much different than California. So we'll talk about that in a bit here. But we had one rain event back in December with the highest peak flow since May of 2011. That's when we had tremendous snowpack there. In this river, you need 800 CFS just to float a canoe down, and it barely got to 1,000 the past couple of years. So here's a slide showing the past 4 years for the Wahi Basin and how low it's been. This is a total stream flow for the Wahi. And very similar to the California drought going on as well, too, but we just don't have as many people living in the Wahi Basin compared to California. So it just doesn't make the news as much as what we found out. So, but when you stack the 4 years together, I mean, it's at the bottom of the barrel, basically, the past 4 years. So you really have to understand your storm tracks. And when you go to talk to these users or the ones in central Idaho up by Sun Valley, they know their storms come from California. And when not coming from California, Nevada, into the Wahi Basin in central Idaho, that's when they miss out. So that's a part of understanding the storm track that brings moisture to your basin. So just looking at one forecast here is a Dvorak reservoir inflow just south of us here. And here's a daily volumetric forecast. Each day we put another blue dot on a page here. And the maroon flow for last year was 122%. This year the flow was only 45% of average. So you start looking at this a little bit more, what's going on here? And you look at the cumulative stream flow I've added on the light blue on the bottom here, and the 5 exceedance forecasts tightening up as you move through the year because the standard error is getting tighter, but we still didn't make it to the bottom forecast line there. And you said, you're still wondering, what happened? And there was those 2 atmospheric river events. Here in Idaho, we typically get rain on snow events from November to mid-February. Below 5,000 feet or so is where they can occur. And that's what happened here. We had these rain events take the snow off, basically. And then we forecast the April through July period, and there just wasn't that much snow to come. So it was basically base flows after that. But these are some of the challenges that you hear about as well, too, working with Dvorak Reservoir, the Corps. They had an early call for fish water, but they're still trying to balance and fill the reservoir at the same time. So it's a balancing act, how much more water still to come. You want to top it off for the recreationists there at the reservoir, but it just wasn't showing up. And then Priest Lake as well, talking to them, it was a new experience for them. The first time they had to force fill the reservoir. They took their summer flows to fill the reservoir early in the year because it just wasn't the snow coming off earlier. So they were trying to maintain fish flows out of there as well, too, later in the summer. So I guess that's one question to think about is what we should be forecasting in the future. Should it still be April 1 through July 31, or should it be the full runoff period with these changing conditions? Here's one other. So moving into the springtime, a lot of winter wheat was planted last year, so it had an early call for irrigation water. And so the irrigation demand was 300% of normal because of the dryness we had back in March and April and early April. And we just don't usually see an early irrigation demand like that. Luckily, those May rains came, so the demand dropped down as well, too. You can see this is for May precipitation in southern Idaho and even Oregon as well, too, and a little bit of Yakima Valley in Washington getting it. But it was more isolated in spotty areas, not widespread. So here's talking to one producer a couple of weeks ago in south central Idaho from Fish Creek Reservoir. It's a small reservoir, and he told me their water allotment was 12% of normal. So I was like, wow, I couldn't really believe it. But then he said the May rains provided an additional growing. So they got, instead of getting 1 or 2 cuttings, they got 2, 3, or maybe, I'm not sure, 4 cuttings. So he was growing organic feed, and it brought in another $100,000 to his operation. Just one producer there. So that's how he was able to make a difference with those May rains. I asked him again, so what did you increase the water allotment to? He goes, we did. We kept it 12%. And so the farmers didn't call for that water until later in the year because the May rains made a difference. Then July, September precipitation, we got a little more across southern Idaho, actually able to reduce the U.S. drought monitor maps south of Pocatello because of the summertime moisture that came into the state. And just a couple summary slides. For the past 4 years, this is 2014, and the monsoon rains that came into southern Idaho, Twin Falls area, these amounts were 1 to 2 inches in 24 hours, but really 2 to 5 inches over the weekend. I've learned to be careful how I present this information because it damaged and ruined some crops, and they had to get rid of them basically, while the benefits were amazing to other people that along the fringes. And in terms of the state of Idaho, it increased the stream flow in the Snake River from when it fell in August all the way through early November. You could still see the influence of this one rain event. So it all kind of depends how you're using that water and putting it to use or managing it. Another example, 2013, we had a great orographic snowfall event coming in the early season. We had record high snowpack down low, but a record high up high, but record low snowpack down low, and then pretty much nothing the rest of the season. So it's the variability that we're learning to live with and how to make your decisions based on that. 2012 was, we didn't lose that mid-elevation snow until April, and we actually had back-to-back 90-degree temperatures in Boise in early April that warmed the snowpack up, and then followed by 1 to 2 inches of rain. So this event brought the snow and stream flow off early and filled some of the reservoirs, and not much has come later in the season. Then one more was 2011, was just a strong La Nina year, and record high snowpacks in the upper Snake in Wyoming as well too. So it's just a wide range of conditions we've seen, and they change mid-season as well too. So rain's good and snow's better. We're all looking forward to 2016 and seeing what comes in. I guess we'll have to wait and see too.
Thanks, Ron. Let's see if there are any questions.
Good. I'll be here all week.
Okay. Ron will be available later for questions.